Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon and watched the stars bend around his ship as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel for the first time in human history. The year was 2387, and humanity had finally broken free from the chains that kept them trapped in their home solar system for thousands of years. Jake felt his heart racing as he looked at the alien star system that appeared on his main screen. 3 planets orbited a yellow sun much like Earth's own, and one of them showed clear signs of advanced civilization. Navigator Lisa Chen checked her instruments twice before speaking. "The readings are correct, Captain. We have reached the Proxima Centauri system, and that 3rd planet is sending out radio signals in patterns we have never seen before." Chief Engineer Ryan Parker joined them on the bridge and wiped sweat from his forehead. "The jump drive worked perfectly, Captain, but we should let it cool down before attempting another long-distance jump." Communications Officer Amanda Brooks was already working at her station trying to decode the strange signals coming from the planet below. Jake had trained his entire life for this moment. Earth scientists had spent 60 years developing the technology that brought them here, and he commanded the first ship to carry humans beyond their home system. The weight of representing all of humanity pressed down on his shoulders, but he felt ready for whatever they might find. The crew of 40 men and women aboard the Horizon were the best Earth had to offer, and they had prepared for every possible scenario, except perhaps the one that was about to unfold. Amanda suddenly looked up from her console with wide eyes. "Captain, I am receiving a transmission in perfect English. The signal is coming from a massive space station that just appeared on our sensors near the 3rd planet." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. How could aliens know their language when this was humanity's first journey beyond Earth? The main screen flickered and suddenly showed the interior of what was obviously an alien bridge. The being that appeared before them was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. When it spoke, its voice was calm and musical. "Greetings, travelers from the 3rd planet of the Sol system. I am Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Confederation. We have been monitoring your world's progress for many years, and we welcome you to the galactic community. Please do not be alarmed. We come in peace and friendship." Jake struggled to find his voice. "You know about Earth. You speak our language. How is this possible?" Veltar smiled in a way that seemed genuinely warm, despite the obvious differences between their species. "We have been watching many worlds that show signs of developing space travel. Your planet has been quite interesting to observe. Your species shows remarkable determination and ingenuity. We learned your languages by studying your broadcasts that have been traveling through space for over a century." Lisa Chen stepped forward. "How many other species are part of this confederation?" Veltar's expression grew more serious. 12 intelligent species have joined together to maintain peace and stability in this region of the galaxy. We have existed for over 3,000 of your years without major conflict. However, we face threats from aggressive empires that seek to conquer and destroy rather than build and cooperate. The hegemony of Krath grows stronger each year and threatens everything we have built." Ryan Parker could not contain his curiosity. "What kind of technology do you possess? Can you help us develop better ships and weapons to defend ourselves?" Veltar raised what appeared to be a hand in a gesture of caution. "Technology must be shared carefully, young ones. Your species shows great potential, but also great capacity for both creation and destruction. We have studied your history, and we see both wonderful achievements and terrible wars. This is not uncommon among developing species, but it requires careful consideration." Amanda Brooks had been recording everything. "Captain, this changes everything we thought we knew about the universe. We are not alone, and we never have been." Jake nodded slowly as he tried to process the implications of what they were learning. "Ambassador Veltar, we are honored by your welcome, but we have many questions. Why reveal yourselves to us now? What do you want from humanity?" Veltar's large eyes seemed to look directly into Jake's soul. We reveal ourselves because your species has reached a critical point in its development. You have achieved faster than light travel, but you have also developed weapons capable of destroying your entire world. History shows us that species at this stage either join the galactic community and find peace, or they destroy themselves through war and hatred. We hope to guide you toward the first path. The alien ambassador gestured toward something off-screen. We invite you to establish an embassy on Zephyr Prime, our capital world. There you can learn about the Confederation and decide if humanity wishes to join us as a protected member species. You would receive advanced technology and protection from the Krath in exchange for following our laws and contributing to our common defense. It is an offer we have made to 6 other species who now thrive under our guidance. Jake looked at his crew and saw excitement mixed with uncertainty in their faces. This was far beyond anything they had planned for when they left Earth. They had expected to find empty worlds or perhaps primitive life, but instead they had discovered a vast galactic civilization that was offering humanity a place among the stars. The decision he made in the next few moments would shape the future of his entire species. 6 months had passed since Captain Jake Morrison and his crew made first contact with the Zephyrian Confederation, and everything had changed for humanity. Dr. Susan Martinez stood in her laboratory on Zephyr Prime, surrounded by equipment that would have seemed like magic to scientists back on Earth. She worked alongside alien researchers who had become her friends and colleagues as they studied the biological differences between humans and the 12 other species in the Confederation. The results of her research troubled her more each day. Human physiology was unlike anything the Confederation had ever encountered. While other species had evolved on worlds with stable climates and predictable environments, Earth had been a planet of constant change and challenge. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and dramatic climate shifts had shaped humanity in ways that made them fundamentally different from every other known intelligent species. Dr. Martinez looked at the data streaming across her screens and shook her head in amazement. Humans could adapt to new situations faster than any species the Confederation had studied. Their brains formed new neural pathways at incredible speeds, and their bodies could adjust to different environments in ways that seemed almost impossible. What took other species generations to achieve humans could accomplish in years or even months. Meanwhile, on the frontier world of New Haven, civilian engineer Pete Williams was learning these lessons firsthand. He had brought his wife Carol and their 2 children to help establish humanity's 3rd colony in Confederation space. The work was hard but rewarding as they built homes and farms on a world that reminded him of the American Midwest back on Earth. The alien colonists from other species watched with amazement as the humans transformed challenging terrain into productive farmland in record time. Pete was working on a water purification system when the attack came without warning. Krath raiders struck from space with ships that moved like deadly shadows across the sky. Their weapons tore through the colony's defenses as if they were made of paper, and their ground forces moved with the precision of a military machine that had conquered dozens of worlds. The other species in the colony panicked and fled, but something different happened with the human settlers. Marine Colonel Chris Johnson had been training joint defense units with Confederation forces, but he was not prepared for what he witnessed during the Krath attack. The human civilians who had never seen combat before began adapting their tactics in real time. Pete Williams abandoned his engineering tools and picked up a weapon he had never used before. Within minutes, he was fighting alongside professional soldiers as if he had trained for years. Carol Williams organized the evacuation of children and elderly colonists while simultaneously coordinating supply lines for the defenders. Their teenage son Danny started running messages between different defensive positions and began suggesting tactical improvements that made the professional soldiers stop and listen. Their daughter Lisa helped treat wounded fighters while simultaneously tracking enemy movement patterns that even the military officers had missed. The battle should have lasted less than an hour with the Krath overwhelming the small colonial. defense force. Instead, it stretched on for 6 hours as the human defenders kept changing their tactics faster than the Krath could adapt. Pete Williams found himself leading a squad of mixed human and alien fighters in a flanking maneuver that caught the enemy completely by surprise. The Krath had used the same successful attack patterns for centuries, but they had never faced opponents who could learn and counter their moves so quickly. Colonel Johnson watched in amazement as civilian humans with no military training began, outmaneuvering professional Krath soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds. The humans did not just learn from their mistakes, they learned from watching their enemies and developed counters to tactics they had never seen before. By the end of the battle, the Krath forces were retreating in complete confusion, having been defeated by an enemy they could not understand or predict. News of the victory spread through Confederation space faster than anyone expected. Admiral Elena Rodriguez, who now commanded the growing human fleet, received urgent requests from multiple worlds asking for human military advisors. The Zephyrian leadership began holding private meetings to discuss what they called the human phenomenon. Ambassador Veltar found himself defending humanity's actions to nervous Confederation counselors who were beginning to question whether inviting humans to join them had been wise. Dr. Martinez received a priority message from Admiral Rodriguez asking her to prepare a full report on human adaptability. The Confederation leadership wanted to understand how humans had achieved such an unexpected victory against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. As she compiled her research, Martinez began to realize that her findings would change everything. The galaxy thought it knew about warfare and evolution. The human colony on New Haven became a symbol of something new and unprecedented in galactic history. Pete Williams returned to his engineering work, but now he was also training other colonists in defensive tactics. His family had become heroes not just to humans, but to the other species who had witnessed their transformation from peaceful settlers to effective warriors in a single day. Children from multiple species began asking their parents why they could not adapt as quickly as the human children who had helped save the colony. Colonel Johnson submitted his report to Confederation Military Command with recommendations that human tactical innovations be studied and potentially adopted by other species. He had watched humans take technologies and weapons they had never seen before and use them more effectively than soldiers who had trained with them for years. The implications were staggering, and he knew that the galaxy would never be the same. Once word of human capabilities spread beyond Confederation space, as Dr. Martinez prepared her final report, she realized she was documenting something that would terrify as many people as it inspired. Humans were not just another species joining the galactic community, they were something entirely new and potentially dangerous. Their ability to adapt and evolve at unprecedented speeds could be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, or it could be the thing that destroyed the careful balance that had maintained peace for thousands of years. 1 year after first contact, Dr. Susan Martinez stood before the Confederation's most distinguished scientists and delivered findings that would shake the foundation of galactic civilization. Her research partner, Kethara, a brilliant Zephyrian xenobiologist, sat beside her as she presented data that revealed humanity's true nature. The conference room fell silent as she explained that humans were evolutionary anomalies, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Every other known intelligent species had evolved under relatively stable conditions on worlds where climate and environment changed slowly over millions of years. Earth, however, had been a planet of constant chaos where massive changes happened in geological eye blinks. Asteroid impacts that would have destroyed life on other worlds had instead forced life on Earth to adapt or die. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and dramatic climate shifts had created evolutionary pressure that forged a species capable of adapting to almost anything. The assembled scientists listened with growing concern as Dr. Martinez explained that human brains were structured differently from all other known species. While other beings could learn and adapt, humans could do both faster than any computer model had predicted possible. They could analyze new situations, recognize patterns, and develop effective responses in time frames that seemed impossible to species whose evolution had followed more predictable paths. Cathara presented the psychological profiles that had emerged from studying human behavior under stress. When faced with new challenges, humans did not panic or freeze like most species. Instead, they became more creative and resourceful. Their stress responses actually enhanced their cognitive abilities rather than limiting them. This meant that the more dangerous a situation became, the more capable humans became at finding solutions. The timing of this revelation could not have been worse. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Admiral, was leading a rescue mission to save Zephyrian civilians trapped on the world of Kepler-7. The planet had been under siege by Krath forces for 3 months, and every previous rescue attempt had failed. The Krath had established orbital defenses that made approach impossible, and ground forces that had held their positions against all Confederation attacks. Admiral Morrison's fleet consisted of 12 human ships supported by 30 Confederation vessels. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Danny Foster, was the same teenager who had distinguished himself during the New Haven attack. At 19 years old, Danny had already developed a reputation for seeing tactical solutions that experienced military commanders missed. As they approached Kepler-7, he was studying Krath defensive patterns with the intensity of a master chess player. The Krath had used the same siege tactics successfully for over 2 centuries. They established orbital platforms that could destroy any approaching fleet, then landed ground forces that dug in and waited for their enemies to exhaust themselves in futile attacks. The strategy had never failed because it took advantage of the fact that most species used predictable military doctrines that changed very slowly over time. Danny Foster spent the 3-day journey to Kepler-7 studying every recorded Krath engagement in Confederation history. By the time they arrived, he had identified 17 patterns that the enemy used in different situations. More importantly, he had developed counters for each pattern based on human tactical principles that emphasize speed, flexibility, and constant adaptation. Admiral Morrison reviewed Danny's battle plan and felt both pride and concern at the innovative strategies his young officer had developed. The battle began exactly as the Krath expected, with Confederation forces making a frontal assault on their orbital defenses. For the first hour, the engagement followed historical patterns, with the attackers taking heavy losses while making little progress. Then Admiral Morrison implemented Danny's plan and everything changed. Human ships began using tactics that the Krath had never encountered before. Instead of following standard attack patterns, they adapted their approach every few minutes, keeping the enemy constantly off balance. Lieutenant Foster coordinated the human squadron movements from his command post while simultaneously analyzing enemy responses and developing new counters in real time. He was essentially fighting a battle while inventing new ways to fight it. The Krath defensive commanders found themselves facing tactics that changed faster than they could respond to. Their centuries-old strategies became useless when facing an enemy that refused to follow predictable patterns. The breakthrough came when Danny realized that the Krath orbital platforms were designed to defend against attacks from specific vectors. By constantly changing approach angles and using movement patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully calculated, the human ships confused the enemy targeting systems. Within 2 hours, the orbital defenses that had held off Confederation forces for months were neutralized by tactics that had been invented during the battle itself. The ground assault phase proved even more devastating for the Krath forces. Human Marines led by Colonel Chris Johnson landed on Kepler-7 and began using terrain and weather conditions in ways that the enemy could not predict or counter. They turned the planet's own environment into a weapon against occupiers who had grown comfortable with their defensive positions. The Krath found themselves fighting enemies who seemed to understand the battlefield better than they did, despite having never been there before. The rescue mission that was expected to take weeks was completed in 18 hours. 3 million Zephyrian civilians were evacuated while Krath forces retreated in complete confusion. The enemy had lost half their fleet and most of their ground forces to tactics they could not understand or predict. News of the victory spread across the galaxy faster than light communication could carry it. Admiral Morrison submitted his after-action report to Confederation Command, but he knew that the real impact would be political rather than military. Humanity had just demonstrated capabilities that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare and evolution. The same adaptive abilities that made humans valuable allies also made them potentially terrifying enemies. Dr. Martinez watched news coverage of the Kepler 7 rescue and realized that her research had become more than academic study. The data she had collected proved that humans were not just another species joining the galactic community. They were something fundamentally different. Their ability to adapt and innovate at unprecedented speeds could reshape galactic civilization, but it could also destroy the careful balance that had maintained peace for thousands of years. As reports of human tactical innovations spread through Confederation space, other species began asking uncomfortable questions about their new allies. The same abilities that made humans effective against the Krath also made them unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The galaxy was beginning to realize that inviting humanity to join them might have been the most significant decision in galactic history. 2 years after first contact, Ambassador Tracy Newman stood in the Confederation Council chambers and felt the weight of hostile stares from representatives of 12 alien species. The same beings who had welcomed humanity with open arms now looked at her with suspicion and barely concealed fear. The honeymoon period was over, and the galaxy was beginning to see humans as something dangerous rather than merely different. The change had started with whispered conversations in diplomatic circles about human unpredictability and aggression. Species that had fought the Krath for centuries without success watched humans achieve victories that seemed impossible. Instead of celebrating these achievements, they began asking uncomfortable questions about what humans might do if they ever became enemies instead of allies. Fear spread faster than admiration through the galactic community. Tracy had spent months trying to address these concerns through official diplomatic channels, but the situation was getting worse instead of better. Reports from human colonies described increasing harassment from Confederation security forces who seemed to be looking for excuses to find fault with human activities. Trade agreements that had been easily negotiated were now being scrutinized and questioned. The warm welcome humanity had received was being replaced by cold suspicion. The root of the problem was human success itself. Bill Thompson, who coordinated human colonial expansion, had established thriving settlements on 17 worlds that other species considered marginal or impossible to inhabit. Humans adapted to extreme temperatures, hostile atmospheres, and dangerous wildlife with a speed that amazed and frightened their neighbors. What took other species generations to achieve, humans accomplished in months. On the world of Altair, 4 human colonists, led by settlement coordinator Janet Phillips, had turned a barren desert planet into productive farmland in less than 2 years. They had developed new agricultural techniques that worked in the planet's harsh environment and created irrigation systems that tapped underground water sources that previous surveys had missed. The Altarian species, who had tried and failed to colonize the same world for 50 years, watched in amazement and growing resentment. The Altarians filed formal complaints with the Confederation claiming that humans were invading their traditional territory and using unfair advantages to establish illegal settlements. They demanded that human colonies be removed and that humanity be restricted to worlds that had been specifically designated for their use. Other species began making similar complaints as human success made their own failures look worse by comparison. Security Chief Karen Bell investigated these allegations and discovered that they were based on fear rather than facts. Humans were not conquering anything, they were simply succeeding where others had failed. Their colonies were established on worlds that had been officially designated as available for settlement. The only law they had broken was the unwritten rule that new species were supposed to struggle and fail before achieving modest success. The situation reached a crisis point when the Threnody species began spreading rumors about human military capabilities and hidden aggressive intentions. The Threnody were master manipulators who had maintained their position in the Confederation through political intrigue rather than honest contribution. They saw humanity's rapid rise as a threat to their own influence and began working to turn other species against the newcomers. Merchant Captain Roy Davis and his crew became unwitting symbols of the growing anti-human sentiment when they were detained by Confederation security forces on charges of aggressive trade practices. Their crime was being too successful at commerce and negotiating deals that were too favorable to human interests. The detention was technically legal, but it was clearly motivated by fear and prejudice rather than actual wrongdoing. Admiral Elena Rodriguez received reports of increasing incidents involving human civilians being harassed, questioned, and detained by Confederation authorities. The pattern was clear, even if the individual incidents seemed minor. The galaxy was testing humanity's patience and looking for excuses to justify the growing fear that humans represented an existential threat to galactic stability. Tracy Newman called for an emergency session of the Confederation Council to address what she termed systematic discrimination against human citizens. The response she received was worse than she had expected. Ambassador Veltar, who had once been humanity's strongest supporter, stood before the council and presented Dr. Martinez's research as evidence that humans were indeed a threat to galactic peace and stability. The research that had been intended to help the galaxy understand human capabilities was now being used to justify fear and hostility. Veltar explained that human adaptability meant they would inevitably come to dominate other species through superior learning and innovation. He argued that containment now was preferable to conquest later and that the Confederation had a responsibility to protect its existing members from the human threat. Even species that had benefited from human military assistance voted to support new restrictions on human expansion and activities. The same tactical innovations that had saved Confederation worlds from Krath attacks were now being cited as evidence of human aggression and militaristic tendencies. The heroes of Kepler-7 had become potential villains in the minds of those they had saved. The final betrayal came when the Confederation Council voted to implement what they called protective protocols for managing human integration. These protocols required all human colonies to accept Confederation oversight and restricted human military activities to defensive actions only. Any human settlement that refused to comply would be considered a rogue state and subject to enforcement action. Tracy Newman stood before the council and delivered what would become known as the Defiance Speech. She rejected the new protocols as discriminatory and announced that humanity would not accept second-class status in a confederation they had helped defend. She warned that attempting to force compliance would have consequences that the galaxy was not prepared to face. Ambassador Veltar responded with what he believed was a reasonable compromise. Humans could maintain their current colonies, but they must accept limits on expansion and military development. They would be treated as a protected junior species under Confederation oversight. It was an offer that other species had accepted. Gratefully, but Tracy Newman's response shocked the council. She stood and spoke words that would echo through galactic history for generations. Humanity did not travel to the stars to accept chains, even if those chains were made of gold and offered with good intentions. The human spirit that had conquered Earth's challenges would not be contained by fear and prejudice. If the Confederation could not accept humans as equals, then humanity would find its own path among the stars. The session ended with Tracy Newman walking out of the council chambers, followed by the human delegation. Behind them, they left a galaxy that was about to learn the difference between having humans as allies and having them as something else entirely. 2.5 years after first contact, the Confederation fleet surrounded New Haven and 17 other human colonies with overwhelming firepower. Admiral Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the battleship UES Constitution and watched enemy ships take positions around her people. The Confederation had decided that humanity represented too great a threat to galactic stability, and they were prepared to use force to solve what they called the human problem. The ultimatum was simple and devastating. All human colonies had 72 hours to evacuate their populations and abandon their settlements. Any humans who remained after the deadline would be considered hostile forces and dealt with accordingly. The Confederation claimed this was a protective measure designed to prevent future conflict, but everyone knew it was exile disguised as diplomacy. Admiral Rodriguez had 37 ships under her command, facing a Confederation fleet of over 200 vessels with superior technology and firepower. The smart military decision would have been to comply with the evacuation order and retreat to human space. But the people on New Haven and the other colonies were not just military personnel, they were families, farmers, engineers, and teachers who had built new lives among the stars. Settlement Coordinator Janet Phillips transmitted her response to the Confederation ultimatum from the colony capital on New Haven. Her words were broadcast across all human settlements and recorded for history. She announced that the colonists would not abandon their homes to satisfy the fears of species who had never bothered to understand humanity. If the Confederation wanted the human colonies, they would have to take them by force. The countdown to conflict began with both sides knowing that everything was about to change. Dr. Susan Martinez, now serving as a military advisor, helped Admiral Rodriguez analyze the tactical situation. The Confederation expected either compliance or a brief resistance followed by inevitable surrender. They had never faced opponents who could adapt their strategies faster than the enemy could respond to them. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the destroyer UES Defiance and prepared his crew for what military analysts were calling the most lopsided battle in galactic history. His ship was one of the smallest in the human fleet, but he had learned something important during the past 2 years. Size and firepower mattered less than the ability to think and adapt under pressure. The Confederation was about to receive an education in human capabilities. The battle began exactly as Confederation commanders expected, with human ships hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. The first exchange of fire seemed to confirm their predictions as human vessels took heavy damage from weapons that were generations ahead of Earth technology. Then something unprecedented happened that changed the course of galactic history. The human fleet did not fight like any military force the Confederation had ever encountered. Instead of following predictable battle formations, they began adapting their tactics in real time. Admiral Rodriguez split her forces into small groups that moved independently while maintaining coordination through rapid communication. Each group developed its own approach to dealing with Confederation ships and shared successful techniques with other units instantly. Captain Morrison discovered that Confederation weapons were incredibly powerful, but they were designed to fight enemies who used standard military doctrines. By constantly changing his ship's movement patterns and attack vectors, he confused enemy targeting systems that expected predictable behavior. Within minutes, he was outmaneuvering ships that were faster and more heavily armed than his own vessel. Lieutenant Danny Foster now promoted to commander coordinated squadron movements while simultaneously developing new tactical innovations. He realized that Confederation ships had been designed to fight the Krath, who used the same strategies for centuries. When faced with opponents who changed their approach every few minutes, the enemy could not adapt quickly enough to maintain their advantage. The breakthrough came when human forces stopped trying to match Confederation firepower and instead focused on using their superior adaptability. They turned the battle into a series of rapid engagements where their ability to learn and adjust faster than their enemies became the decisive factor. Confederation commanders found themselves fighting a war where the rules changed faster than they could understand them. Admiral Rodriguez watched in amazement as her outnumbered fleet began achieving victories that should have been impossible. Human ships that had been taking heavy damage started capturing Confederation vessels whose crews could not adapt to human tactics quickly enough. The massive technological advantage that was supposed to guarantee Confederation victory became meaningless when facing opponents who could turn any situation to their advantage. The battle that was expected to last less than 6 hours stretched into a full day as human forces continued to achieve the impossible. Captain Morrison's destroyer managed to disable 3 Confederation cruisers using tactics that he invented during the engagement. Commander Foster coordinated attacks that captured enemy ships faster than the Confederation could bring reinforcements into the battle zone. Settlement Coordinator Janet Phillips watched the space battle from New Haven's surface and realized that humanity was writing a new chapter in galactic history. The species that had been dismissed as junior members of galactic civilization were proving that adaptability and innovation could overcome any technological disadvantage. The Confederation fleet that had come to enforce their will was instead learning to fear the people they had tried to intimidate. By the end of the first day, human forces had not only survived the Confederation attack, they had captured over 60 enemy ships and forced the remainder to retreat beyond weapons range. Admiral Rodriguez found herself in command of a fleet that was larger and more powerful than the one she had started with. The Confederation had provided her with an upgrade by attacking her people. The galaxy watched in shock as news of the battle spread through faster than light communication networks. The Confederation's most powerful fleet had been defeated by opponents who were supposed to be helpless colonists. Military analysts struggled to understand how humans had achieved victories that seemed to violate everything the galaxy knew about space warfare. But the real shock was yet to come. Admiral Rodriguez did not press her advantage or launch a counter-attack against Confederation space. Instead, she transmitted a message that confused and terrified the galaxy's leadership. Humanity was offering peace to the species that had just tried to destroy them. They wanted to negotiate a settlement that would allow both sides to coexist without further conflict. The message reached Ambassador Veltar and the Confederation Council as they tried to process their defeat. They had expected either human compliance or a brief resistance followed by surrender. Instead, they faced opponents who had turned their own weapons against them and then offered peace from a position of strength. The galaxy was beginning to realize that they had seriously underestimated the species from Earth. 3 years after first contact, Captain Jake Morrison walked into the Confederation Council chambers on Zephyr Prime, carrying a peace proposal that would reshape galactic civilization. The same room where humanity had first been welcomed now hosted negotiations between equals rather than discussions between a superior confederation and junior species. The Battle of New Haven had changed everything, and the galaxy was still struggling to understand the implications. Admiral Elena Rodriguez had chosen Morrison to lead the human delegation because his victory at New Haven had made him a symbol of human capabilities. The destroyer captain, who had captured 3 Confederation cruisers with tactics invented during battle, now sat across from Ambassador Veltar and proposed a new relationship between humanity and the galactic community. The human proposal was unprecedented in galactic history. Morrison announced that humanity would accept exile from Confederation space, but they demanded formal recognition of their sovereignty over the 18 worlds they had settled. In exchange, they offered a non-aggression pact and continued cooperation against the Krath hegemony. It was diplomacy backed by demonstrated military capability rather than requests from a position of weakness. The Confederation Council struggled to process what they were hearing. The species they had tried to contain was now dictating terms from a position of strength. Ambassador Veltar found himself negotiating with beings who had proven they could defeat Confederation fleets but chose to offer peace instead of conquest. The psychology of the situation was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Morrison stood before the council and delivered what historians would later call the Revelation speech. He explained that humans did not want to conquer the galaxy. They simply wanted to exist in it as free beings. Their victory at New Haven had not been motivated by aggression, but by the fundamental human refusal to accept slavery even when it was offered with good intentions. The galaxy had tried to chain them and learned that humans would break any chains that restricted their freedom. Dr. Susan Martinez provided scientific context for Morrison's political message. Her research proved that human adaptability made them capable of rapid technological and social advancement that could benefit the entire galaxy. Instead of fearing human capabilities, other species could learn from them and develop their own abilities to adapt and innovate. The choice was between competition and cooperation. The Confederation faced a decision that would define their future relationship with humanity. They could continue to view humans as a threat and face the possibility of ongoing conflict with an opponent who had already proven capable of defeating their most powerful fleets. Or they could accept human independence and explore the benefits of cooperation with a species that possessed unprecedented abilities. Ambassador Veltar spoke for the Confederation leadership when he announced their acceptance of human independence. The 18 human colonies would be recognized as the sovereign territory of the newly formed Human Stellar Republic. Trade agreements and mutual defense pacts would be negotiated between equals rather than imposed by a superior power on junior members. It was a diplomatic revolution that acknowledged the reality of human capabilities. The formation of the Human Stellar Republic sent shockwaves through galactic civilization that extended far beyond Confederation space. Other species began studying human tactics and philosophy in attempts to understand how such rapid adaptation was possible. Military academies across the galaxy added courses on human strategic thinking to their curricula. Scientists began researching whether other species could develop similar adaptive capabilities. Settlement coordinator Janet Phillips became the first president of the Human Stellar Republic and immediately began implementing policies that reflected human values of freedom, innovation, and cooperation. The human colonies that had been threatened with destruction became centers of technological and social advancement that attracted visitors from across the galaxy. Other species came to study human methods, and many stayed to become permanent residents. The real test of the new relationship came 6 months later when the Krath hegemony launched their largest offensive in centuries. The enemy had observed the civil conflict between humans and the Confederation and decided it was the perfect time to strike while their opponents were divided. They committed over 3,000 ships to a campaign designed to conquer Confederation space while humanity was distracted by independence. The Krath made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed that human independence meant the end of cooperation between the Republic and the Confederation. Instead, they discovered that humans were willing to honor their mutual defense agreements even with former enemies who had tried to destroy them. Admiral Rodriguez led a combined human and Confederation fleet that included captured ships crewed by volunteers from multiple species. The combined fleet that faced the Krath offensive was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Confederation ships used traditional tactics supported by human vessels that employed rapid adaptation strategies. But the real surprise was that Confederation crews had begun learning human tactical methods during the months since the New Haven battle. They were no longer predictable opponents who followed ancient military doctrines. Commander Danny Foster coordinated the defense from his flagship and watched in amazement as Confederation officers began developing innovative strategies. In real time, the galaxy's teacher instinct had awakened, and species that had been set in their ways for millennia were learning to adapt and evolve. The Krath found themselves facing not just human opponents, but an entire coalition that had learned to think like humans. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the Krath offensive force. More importantly, it marked the end of the Krath hegemony as a galactic threat. The enemy that had terrorized civilized space for centuries discovered that they could not adapt quickly enough to survive against opponents who could evolve their strategies faster than traditional military thinking allowed. Ambassador Tracy Newman stood on the observation deck of the new Human Republic capital station and watched ships from dozens of species arrive for the first Galactic Adaptation Council. The organization had been founded to share human methods of rapid learning and innovation with other species who wanted to develop similar capabilities. It represented a fundamental shift from the static galactic civilization that had existed for millennia. The galaxy had learned to fear the Earthborn, not because they were conquerors, but because they were teachers. They did not destroy civilizations, they made them better. Humanity's gift to the galaxy was not superior technology or military might, but the ability to adapt, overcome obstacles, and grow beyond previous limitations. Species that had been stuck in ancient patterns for thousands of years were learning to evolve and improve at unprecedented rates. Dr. Martinez published her final research report on human adaptability and its implications for galactic civilization. She concluded that humanity's arrival had triggered an evolutionary leap that would reshape the galaxy for generations to come. The static hierarchical structure that had maintained peace through superior force was being replaced by a dynamic, cooperative system based on shared growth and mutual adaptation. President Phillips addressed the first joint session of the Human Republic Congress and reflected on how far humanity had traveled since Captain Morrison's ship had first dropped out of faster-than-light travel 3 years earlier. They had gone from being welcomed as junior members of galactic civilization to becoming teachers who helped other species unlock their own potential for growth and adaptation. The day the galaxy learned to fear the Earthborn had become the day. It learned to grow beyond its previous limits. Fear had been transformed into respect and cooperation. The species that had once seemed like a threat to galactic stability had instead become the catalyst for unprecedented advancement and improvement across civilized space. Humanity had achieved something greater than conquest. They had achieved the transformation of an entire galaxy.